Thanks, guys, to everybody again for joining us today. So I suppose I just wanted to kick this off today by understanding a little bit or explaining a little bit why people are here today with us to talk about this change. Most people don't wake up in the morning saying they want to transform their organization or their business or take on a new piece of software or IT. But what we want to suggest today is that some of these needs that are driving the reasons that you're coming to the table to affect this change or this software or IT implementation may be driven by some of what we have here on the screen. So it might be that you have inefficient systems, or they might be legacy systems that you're using. We might have inefficient processes that are actually driving us to think about this change. We might have gaps in the data that we need to report from, or inaccuracies, or a lot of people like to refer to it now as we've no single source of truth. We might have user experience issues. So in a lot of cases, we have external parties or customers using our systems, interacting with them that might not be fit for purpose. We might come under competitive pressures from the market, or a need to get a better return on investment for what we're paying for our system at the moment. But we don't, as I said, wake up in the morning deciding we want this. There is a need. There's some incentive that's actually driving us to make this change. And myself and my colleague David are going to describe to you today here how we think about this in LBS, take you through an approach that we favor, and also how we think about bringing people in the organization on that change journey with you. So, just to make to acknowledge here, I suppose if we define, or if we have a need, we really need to think about what this change, if we're going to affect a change in the organization, is going to mean for us. And it's why we put this piece together, just to give people context as to really the reality check here, that 70% of digital transformations actually fail. And this is not down to the technology itself typically, but it's down to, people's resistance to change, the user adoption, unclear requirements from an organization, or a lack of leadership or stakeholder involvement with key or critical people throughout the organization who are going to help make this change a success or affect this change for us. So what I really want to do from the outset today is to explain to people, or to set the stage, that while the name of this webinar, and we're here, hopefully people are looking or attempting to make that software change or implement a new IT in the organization, that this is in fact a change to the organization. It's a business change initiative, and it needs to be thought of like that, and needs to be managed in that manner. We need clarity across the organization as to what we're trying to achieve to be absolutely critical, so that we don't waste our time or investment in the project, and that we actually come to a successful implementation phase. So what we're doing today, technology change isn't just about systems, it's about the people, process, and purpose. So what I'd like to suggest is that today, my colleague David, who I'll hand over to now shortly, is going to take you through the first 3 steps here today. This is really about getting the purpose and reason for change in your organization very clear. David's going to take you through an approach or the execution as to how that should be, how we think about it, and how it can be carried out across your organization. And then a little bit on the governance of those programs as you work through those stages. I'll then come back and do a piece on the change management. I suppose we need to be very clear that people in the organization are absolutely critical to the success of your software or change implementation. So the emotional side absolutely needs to be brought into this, about how we bring people on the journey. So this approach will address all 4 of the above. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to David.
Thanks, Mark. So yeah, we'll just dive straight into this, I suppose, and just to talk about what you're looking at there. Within LBS, we have adopted the 4D model. So this is a double diamond model with layers either side of that. The 4D essentially stands for discover, define, develop, and deliver. and each one of these are defined phases within any project. So regardless of what the system or project may be, whether that be in a CRM or an ERP, LMS, learning management system, it's all consistent that we apply these same principles and these same fundamental stages um, into the project right from the start. So in terms of discovery phase, effectively that is about exploring and understanding the problem that's within the business. Um, that is grounded at the start to understand what it is that we need to do from there. The next phase around that is the define phase, and that's about prioritizing the focus areas and understanding what it is that we need to progress on and prioritize. The third element then is very much focused on ensuring that we have structured oversight for the future state solutions in developing the system around that. And the fourth is the actual delivery of the project or the system itself once everything has been set up. And that's about the controlled delivery, the controlled test, the deployment, and the adoption that people actually adopt the system. And I suppose as we talk about this in a timeline, left to right in those four stages, we also have to have consistent kind of structures or scaffolding throughout that. And that starts with the leadership values at the top and the governance and engagement throughout at the bottom. This whole framework, it's quite holistic, top to bottom in terms of leadership through the middle layers of the organization. And it considers all the different interactions within the organization in terms of whether that be manufacturing, service delivery, your customer, every element around that. Within LBS, we're quite focused in terms of lean integration as well. That's at the heart of what we do. And it's obviously very much focused on the user elements as well. So who's actually going to be using the system? So it's quite holistic in terms of its nature. So moving on, that's just the top line approach in terms of how we actually apply this. At the very top layer, we talk about leadership. The process, I suppose, of the middle layer isn't enough. What leadership need to bring to the table to begin with is a vision. We need to understand, why do we need a system to enable this? What is the business trying to do? What are you hoping to strategically achieve in the next 3, 5 years? Are you looking to expand markets? Are you looking to really automate? What's the key drivers within that? So we need leadership to have an authentic engagement with us right from the outset. And it's not about delegating this across the IT. It's not really an IT-led project in its kind of essence. It's really focused on driving the business itself and aligning those business goals then with the technology. And obviously then reinforcing a culture behind the business then that will adapt that technology as well. Moving on to the next slide, Mark, to understand this, I mean, if we were to think about the organization as a whole, there's three levels within the organization. There's that strategic big picture thinking, how we're thinking long term, communicate the vision. At a middle level of middle managers, it's more tactical. What do we need to functionally do on a day-to-day basis? What actions are needed around that? We in LBS need to obviously engage with those people as well. And also then the operational people, the processes, people at the front line, understand the needs for them. So moving on, we'll get into the depths of the structure of the double diamond itself. We have a formula, I suppose, or a little narrative there that you can see that we have an incentive and we have the vision all within the leadership. The next phase then is we have to have skills, resources, and a plan. And if we have that, then we have success. If you take away any one of those elements, obviously the project itself will fail. If you don't have a vision, you have confusion. If you don't have the skills to enable this, you have fear. If you don't have the resources, you have frustration. And obviously, without a plan, you're destined for failure. So that's what we would see as core to the central piece of this in terms of driving it forward. So if we go into this in a bit more detail and look at the very first phase, which is the discovery phase, I can break this down for you in a little bit more detail and distill this out.
Thanks, Dave. I think just at this point, I think it's probably worth stressing again that in any of these engagements, whether it be for small IT projects or a large scale ERP system that's been put in place, we view and approach these in the very same manner. The scale of them changes, yes, but it's the very same approach, right? And David will take you through that a little more detail. But I think it's clear, or we have to keep in mind that while you're moving from left to right through the double diamond, the discover, define, develop, and deliver, those leadership values and that governance and the engagement piece, which we'll come back to, should be present throughout.
Thanks, Mark. So looking at the stages to help us choose the right system, what we have here is key activities, stakeholders that are required for that particular stage, and definitive outputs. So within the discovery phase, really, it's about discovering the as is. What is the business currently doing? What is it capable of doing? What systems does it have in place? What people are involved? What pain points are there? So there's a lot of activities that need to happen, as Mark mentioned there, regardless of what the system is. We need to understand that current state. It's about understanding the process within there, stakeholder mapping. We go in, review the processes. If there's not processes already in place, we need to define them and identify the key areas that we need to focus on. So those activities are central for every discovery phase. At the discovery phase, you also need, as I mentioned, senior leadership, help guide this. And then obviously you'll have department heads, SMEs, which are the subject matter experts for various different areas. Typically, you'll have finance as well involved in this because there's costs, there's overheads. It's about establishing those parameters and doing all that as part of discovery. And at the end of that, you should have a discovery report. You'll have some initial process maps. You're going to have some level of needs summary generated. So just flicking on to the graphic there, Mark, you'll have some defined processes put in place to understand, okay, well, this is what we're doing now, and this is what we need to do to change from that as is state and get into a to be state. And this would be typical activities and outputs that you would have as part of discovery. The next phase then is about the definition. So you're moving away from that area of collecting all of your information. This area here is really about refining what it is. You're moving from, what is the problem that we really need to solve here? We need to define the scope. We need to understand what it is that we need to change. We're aligning the people, the tech, the process. We're prioritizing the user and the business needs, and really getting into, well, what are nice to haves and what are the must haves? And we're breaking that down. The stakeholders might be slightly different to the first stage. You're really getting into the specific elements of what it is that we're trying to deliver. And as outputs from that, then what you may have is a list of functional requirements. You may have a prioritization matrix. You may have something specific as a request for tender or a request for information where you're then going specifically, you've focused in on what you want to change. You know who the areas are, the vendors are that you need to go to. And we can get into some very specific elements. You could have scoring checklists and areas of what it is that we need to assess. So if you just want to bring up the next graphic there, Mark, this would be something that we in LBS have designed in the past related to selection criteria for systems. Once we've done the original analysis, understanding the market in terms of who are the best vendors that can suit your needs. And that goes into, have they delivered these projects before, the size, the scale, the costs, all of these different areas. And there's quite kind of very specific thought processes that need to go into that definition to get us to a point of choosing the correct vendor or the correct system to move forward with. Moving on to the next stage, once you've chosen that vendor, you're going into the development of that system. And it's about designing a system that's fit for purpose. It's about building alignment between the business and the tech teams, and it's co-design with those functional teams. Again, it's quite holistic. The users are central to this, and it's about translating the need into the vendors around that. So key activities, solution design, co-creation workshops, prototyping, everything around that to help build out those outputs, which are the KPIs, could be the project roadmap, specifications. And again, you'll have a very specific team that would need to be part of that stage. As an output of that, you're looking at a digital roadmap here, which is a sample that we would have done before. As you can see, the specific priority areas going to be introduced at specific points in time, and they will also help particular areas of the business. You can see there in, okay, well, this is going to be a people focus, there's going to be a culture focus, there's going to be a system focus. It's quite holistic, but the roadmap has to be clearly understood across the business in terms of the delivery and the development of that piece. Moving on then to the final stage, which is delivery. This is really all about the governance of how we're rolling this out. It's about the testing of the system. It's about the cut over to the platform. It's about enforcing those stage gates in the build reviews, the go and no go live, and having a very defined focus in terms of how we're testing and how we're rolling out. Again, the activities will vary depending on what the system is. The outputs will vary depending on what the system is as well. But essentially what we're trying to do within the framework is consistent around that. So as an example there, Mark, you may bring up the graphic. This here is a go live checklist in terms of what training is taking place, what comms have taken place, what UAT is taking place, and having specific checklists in place to make sure that we have this stage gated, that we are not moving through anything or negating anything or forgetting anything at a specific point in time before you actually go live. So these things all fit nicely within that generic framework. If you want to move forward, Mark, as holistically put, this is just a top line kind of synopsis of some of the key activities, the stakeholders, and the outputs that you would have within any system change and business change. Obviously, they will slightly vary, but this is a general kind of one that we would refer to within LBS that can be a good subsection for all of our change activities that we look at. Moving on from this, onto the next slide there, Mark.
David, I might just jump in on that. Just something came to mind as you were speaking, because it's something that's come up with a number of our customers, is that if there is a suggested, if an organization is introducing more than one system or more than one change, we would again take this similar blueprint or approach and effectively look at that or each individual change through that same lens. So you may be at differing stages for, if you're two different projects running at the same time, you may be at the develop stage with a certain project and maybe at the discovery or early stage of another. If you go back to that roadmap that David shared, there may be initiatives that run in tandem. And hopefully there are, because you would like to think that, certain people in the organization are going through training while other elements are being developed. But if there's more than one change initiative, we would apply the same process to both. Sorry, guys, I might have somebody off mute there. Just a bit of background noise. So yeah, David, just to say, yeah, we approach each change with the same lens or same thinking across the organization. Again, for anybody who's just joined us slightly late, if there's any questions at all throughout, please just add them into the chat or raise the hand and we'll get to those.
So obviously, in terms of delivering systems to augment or grow your business, obviously you either need to have the right resources internally or you need to partner people who can give you those resources and give you that level of expertise. So as you can see there across the framework of key activities, you need to understand and do this correctly. And we would see that the activities and the outputs as being central to this. So well-matched delivery partner isn't really just a supplier. It's a strategic enabler to ensure that you get to the outputs that you need at every stage of that transformation. And it's critical then, I suppose, that that's where the governance comes in, that really you are putting the right foundations in place for that. if you move on to the next slide there, Mark, we spoke across the 4 different sections there, but underpinning everything, it is that governance and engagement throughout. I suppose governance sometimes might get a bad name, but if it's done right, it's not bureaucracy. It's about the navigation, and it helps you to stay aligned. It helps make fast decisions, reduce the chaos, and it holds people accountable. So a steering committee, for example, it's about having the right roles in place, the change leads, the process owners, make sure that everyone with a stake in the business is involved. And it's about really LBS can oversee and help that structure in place to make sure that the correct governance is in place throughout all of these project change enablements that you're hoping to do. Moving forward there, Mark, on the next slide. Every one of these stage gates, it's really about building completion. The UAT, again, that's about testing, the readiness, the go live, having regular forums so that you're communicating and having the right people at these forums, and they show up holding people accountable. There's no point in having these meetings if people aren't there to add guidance and to have that sign off of accountability. So having the meetings on a weekly, monthly basis, having your documentation in place to make sure that these meeting minutes are signed off, action logs are in place, RAG dashboards, red, amber, green, whether it's go or no go, the status of where things are at, have clear escalation paths for every decision that's made along that journey, left to right, from start to end. So you understand why are we putting in this module ahead of another one, and so on. Everything is transparent within those decision logs, and we obviously support all of that within LBS as well. Governance done well, it makes things go faster. It really doesn't slow things down at all. As well as the governance, and I spoke about the engagement, this needs to be continual throughout. The change management, it goes beyond just the project stages. It's about the people side. It's human-centered design. So it is that engagement to people on an ongoing basis, and successful engagement starts with the people right from the outset. I'm going to hand over to Mark, who will talk more about the engagement elements of change and how we can support around that as well.
Thanks, David. Appreciate that. So, look, I hope that was clear. I think David brought us through very well, just an approach that we can take, a structure, or the scaffolding, as David refers to it as well, to approach the change in your organization. But it is absolutely critical, and we said this at the top of the hour or the half hour, that people need to be brought on this journey from the outset. They are ultimately going to be the people who feel this change the most, who are using new systems in your organization, and who are feeling the change across the organization as well. So I'll move forward just on to preparing for systemic change and how this change management needs to be managed in your organization. So I'll just leave this quote here from John Fisher. But this really touches on the emotional side of how people are going to be thinking and feeling about this change. We often think about IT projects and software projects as a technical element. I need to design this. I need to understand that the system can do this. I need to understand, can our server run this new software? But we very often forget that the main drivers, the main people involved in this are those people who are going to be interacting with the system on a day-to-day basis, whether it is those partners that we're talking about earlier in David's piece, who are key to actually the success of the program implementation, or the ultimate users of the system. We need everybody to be brought on that journey. And this is a little bit more about how we are thinking about that across the organization. So I don't know if anybody on the call has experienced any of these feelings recently, but they are extremely common. This is almost become our bingo card when we ask people how they feel about these changes across their organization or new IT systems that are being implemented. Too often we're hearing that people are being told this is the new process, this is the new system, rather than being brought on the journey or having a part to play in its actual rollout. So when these things happen, or when they're not managed correctly across the organization, these are some of the ways that people can actually feel. present across the organization. And as well as how they feel, we also see how they think. So we'll move on to a model or a framework change curve. You'll see a little more about this in a moment, but this is a lot again of what we're hearing from people when change is being affected to them and they're not being or successfully being brought on that journey, or it's not being rolled out correctly across the organization. And this very often, if it's not managed, can get to the stage where unfortunately people may leave the organization, maybe just dissatisfied in their role, or not feel like they've been empowered to do their job, that their autonomy has been taken from them. And this is something that absolutely needs to be managed across the organization from the outset. This is a change curve, the Kubler-Ross change curve. So again, this is some of those feelings that you might have seen on the earlier slide. This is often how this change curve plays out across an organization. So if I take an example of, the stages, shock and denial. So very often when people hear there's going to be a change, you might have a little uptick and they say, that's brilliant. The system isn't working the way we want it to. Which, if we engage in a change program or in an IT software change, can very often change to anger, feelings of anger when people say, I wasn't consulted, or I thought the old system was fine, or this isn't what I thought it was going to be. I didn't think I'd be involved in workshops, like trying to understand requirements gathering for the new system. Very often turns into bargaining, right? Where you get well, I'll just go back to the old system and I'll work with it a little better if you just let us stick with it. Or I see you want to move to this new system, but could we do it slightly differently so that it would help me, or that it would be a little easier for us, right? So this little bit of bargaining or negotiating goes on, and it's typically what we see across organizations. Sometimes, quite often actually, we hit a lull where it's kind of a dejection, where you see a lot of those things. It's also the stages of grief, if anybody has kind of picked that up, but it's similarly applied to the change in an organization, right? Where people very often get down in the dumps on this, where they're at the bottom of a big piece of change across the organization, which may or not have had communication or empowerment across the organization. They may not have been brought on that journey correctly. And it really feels like this has gotten to a stage where I don't know if I can work with this. People may have felt it in their own organizations where there's an implementation that is very difficult or very tough, or people have left who were very an integral part of the resource team or partner, as David referred to earlier. And it can really feel like a tough time in the organization when you're really going through that change. Those habits in the organization that you're used to, showing up in the morning, logging into your system, it's now completely changed and turned on its head. But we do see when people are coming out of this and you're changing for the better, once those systems, processes, changes start bedding in, start getting traction, and people are starting to be brought on that journey, that it really builds up a head of steam to the ultimate acceptance. So the main reason we want to share this curve is to give people an understanding of this is very common. We see it across every organization, and we just need to be aware, and leadership need to be aware that it needs to be managed, or it needs to be understood. Managers need to be empathetic to this, and it needs to be managed across the organization so that we can affect that successful change. So what we want to step into further to this are, how can we manage this change? So people may be aware of John Kotter's 8 steps, but this is our go-to in terms of how we think about, or how we manage that, hopefully not grief, but change across the organization, where we want to initially, I suppose, group together or create the climate for this change. So how do we create the urgency? David referred to earlier the incentive, the need. This system's not going to work for us. It doesn't do what we need it to. There are data gaps, right? If we create the urgency in the organization around, well, there is an absolute need, or the support for the software is going to drop off in 2 years' time, right? There's an urgency around that. Building the guiding team. So in addition to the people who are going to be resourced and partner across the 4 stages of the implementation or the program, We need to build a guiding team as to the change across the organization as well, and bringing the people on the journey. So they should form part of that resource or partner team to actually bring the people who are going to be proponents or super users across the organization, or the people who are the go-to leaders around the system to support those who are going to be using it at the end stages. When we say we want to develop a vision, this comes from leadership, but this ultimately has to be, how are we going to make your life better, right? What's in it for you to be part of this change, or when this change is affected, how is your life going to be better? We need, as a leadership team and management team, need to understand and be able to communicate what this is and how it's going to make people's lives better, really, because they are ultimately going to be the ones who feel this change the most, the end users. Which brings me on nicely to the next point. Probably the most critical step in all of this is the communication. So at this stage, we would refer to these as engaging and enabling the whole organization. But the communication, which we'll step into a little further in the next slide, is absolutely critical to bringing people on this journey, to managing this change, and to successfully implementing the change, whether IT or otherwise in your organization. We want to empower the action, which means that we want to bring people on the journey and delegate autonomy and accountability to people so that they can actually be part of or affecting their own change. So let them join you on the journey. Don't tell them this is what's going to happen, or here's the new system when you show up on a Monday morning. Bring them along that journey and communicate clearly with them. Generate the short-term wins. There are going to be natural stage gates, David referred to again, between our stages of discovery, define, develop, and deliver. But also throughout the delivery, there are going to be milestones of, this portion of the software has been rolled out, or this testing has been completed. They need to be harnessed and used as communication opportunities across the organization. Congratulations to the team who've completed the testing. Great job. We're now on to the next phase. This will avoid the fatigue of a larger project, but also brings people and builds morale across a project, which, as we know, are not always the most straightforward. They will throw up issues across their implementation. So generate those short-term wins to boost that morale across the organization. And finally, in the implementing and sustaining change, this is very often, if people have been through on the call, what we would refer to as a kind of a hypercare stage or phase, or where we need to put our arms around the people who are involved in this change to show higher levels of support, sit with them while they're using the new system, have periods of change where if a change is rolled out, that we stay with somebody or stay close to somebody, or get a lot of feedback from them to understand, are there any other tweaks that need changing, or do we need to step back to make sure we get this right? So it's really about building that into the process, as well as your typical, user manuals, standard operating procedures. They can all really help in this, managing the change across the organization. So just on that, number 4 there, the communications, just want to step that forward into how we communicate this change. So this is another model that we try and keep in mind, but this bar across the top is stages of an individual's commitment to the change. And what we're trying to do at all times when we communicate, and it will differ at different stages. At your discovery stage, it's going to be very different from what it is at the delivery stage, because people are going to be a lot more aware of the project, hopefully, if they're brought on the journey. But are they aware of the change that's going to happen? Has it been socialized across the organization? Do they understand why or what's going to be involved? Are they accepting of it, right? Are they turning the bottom of our curve and we heading towards acceptance of this? And involvement, right? Because that, if they involved in the change and involved in the communication or asked for their opinion, how would their team feel if it was communicated in this manner? That drives buy-in. So it's about building that commitment across the organization through this at all stages. So a couple of notes there around, how this can help or how we can do that a little better. But clarity and transparency, early and often. This should be 2 ways. Again, David referred to that, top down, bottom up. There should be feedback from all parts of the organization, multiple channels, whether you're doing this, WhatsApp on WhatsApp with teams who are out in the field, email communication, notice boards in your operation or in your plant. But finally, and most importantly, again, and it's why we brought you through how people feel and that curve, be empathetic. If you're involved in the change and know everything about the system and then are telling people this is what's new and this is how they have to operate, it's very difficult. They're going to be feeling this differently to you. So we want to acknowledge and be empathetic to these people, acknowledge the change might be felt differently by them, and make sure that we're managing that across the organization. So that's my final piece on the change management. I haven't any questions yet in the chat. I don't know, is there anything anybody feels about this or has experienced to this point in their organization that has resonated with them? But I will just step forward into, I suppose, just a recap as to what we covered. And what I hope you take away from this is that in thinking about an IT or software change, you have to think about it as more of a business change. We have given you, or David has brought you through an approach, a blueprint, the scaffolding that we can use to actually look at 1, 2, and 3. And it does overlap quite a bit with how people are involved with the project itself. But we also absolutely have to take care of and understand how people are going to feel about this. So the mechanics, the technicalities, David is all over in our first 3 steps. But again, that final piece, we just need to be very clear on how it's going to affect the people in our organization. Anything else I missed, David, from your side, or are we?
No, thanks very much, Mark. Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's just to re-emphasize the communication. It has to be regular and transparent and consistent throughout as you're going through the timeline, all the way through discovery, through delivery, and thinking about how you actually engage with your partners, with your own organization staff, with your customers, to get a full understanding of the needs and what's actually going to happen as part of that change. So it as well as it being internally, it can be out to your customers as well. Good information sources to make sure that you're delivering the right change for your organization.
Excellent. So guys, just the QR code up here to our own website, but I know there are certain people on the call who are going to be going through these stages, maybe at varying stages along the approach. Some of this stuff might resonate with you, but if you're thinking about this change and want to understand a little better how we might approach this, we will absolutely share the recording from the webinar today. But we can also share some of these tools and templates if they feel that they'll be helpful for you in your organization. But again, we've a lot of close customers who have joined us in a lot of these journeys and some on the call with us. And we really want to try and help anybody in this area to affect change and drive value in their organization. So if you want to talk to us about how you can do this for your own organization or manage it a little better, please don't hesitate to reach out to any of all of us. So without further ado, I'll leave everybody to the rest of their day, and we'll follow up and share that webinar shortly. Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.